Hey guys, tonight we descend into the itchy, feverish world of medieval illness. The air is thick with wood smoke and suspicion. You're trudging through a narrow alley, the mud sucking at your boots and the smell, somewhere between spoiled meat and bad decisions, clinging to every breath. You don't feel great. Your head is hot, your hands are clammy, and your neck's a little sore. Welcome to the 14th century. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these sleepy little time machines reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts slowly. Just a little fatigue, a pinch behind your eyes, like you didn't sleep quite right. But sleep is hard to come by in a world where the walls are thin. The neighbors scream in Latin about sin, and the rats are running social clubs in your pantry. You're in a town nestled in the heart of medieval Europe. Maybe it's Florence, maybe it's Paris, maybe it's some nameless place that won't survive long enough to matter. People here are used to suffering. Half the kids don't live to see their 10th name day, and adults die from things like stubbed toes and suspicious cheese. Still, lately, something feels wrong. You hear rumors. A ship came in from the east, its crew more skeleton than sailor. Some say the disease travels with the wind. Others whisper that it's punishment for vanity, or greed, or not tithing enough. You wonder which one applies to you. Probably all three. At the market, people are sneezing more than usual. A man collapses in front of the fish stand, twitching, a black swelling rising under his jaw like a bruise in bloom. His wife screams. No one helps. By the next morning, you have a sore in your armpit. Coincidence? Of course. Probably just a really aggressive ingrown hair. You tell yourself that as you try to stop shaking. The local priest says the disease is God's wrath made visible. But he also sells indulgences and has a mistress named Katerina, so his moral compass might be a bit off. Still, people listen. They light candles, beat their chests, and beg for forgiveness. A few start whipping themselves in the streets, naked, bleeding, eyes wild with fear. Flagellants, they're called. You make a note to steer clear. They seem committed, and that's terrifying. Doctors are no help either. They wear long black robes and masks shaped like bird beaks stuffed with herbs. Supposedly, it filters out the evil air. Realistically, they look like Halloween came early and left despair in its wake. One checks your pulse through a pair of leather gloves, shrugs, and mutters something about imbalance of humors. You ask what that means. He hands you a sachet of rosemary and suggests you drink more ale. Brilliant. Historians still argue whether the plague entered Europe through fleas on rats, ships from Crimea, or as part of an elaborate plot involving bad hygiene and worse luck. What we do know is that by the end of it, up to 60% of Europe might be dead. That's a lot. Like, everyone you know gone, kind of a lot. Back in your town, things unravel fast. The baker's gone. The blacksmith boarded up his shop. Even the monks are sneezing now, and they were supposed to have divine protection, or at least better hand-washing protocols. You find yourself walking through eerily quiet streets. There are no birds singing, no children playing, just the occasional thud of a body hitting the ground. Sometimes there are cries. More often, there's silence. Eventually, carts roll through town, pulled by men with scarves over their mouths, calling out the now iconic phrase, "Bring out your dead." It sounds theatrical now, but to you, it's real. You drag your neighbor's body to the curb. He was old, sure, but he still owed you a goose. You lie down that night and try not to think about the ache in your joints, or the weird smell coming from your feet, or the dream you had where a giant rat offered you a deal in exchange for your soul. That one might have been the fever. In the middle of it all, people start blaming each other. Foreigners, lepers, Jews, anyone different. Panic and ignorance make a potent combo. You watch as your friend's spice merchant gets dragged from his stall and beaten, accused of poisoning wells. He cries out that he just sells saffron. It doesn't matter. One scholar will later claim that the plague helped shift Europe toward modernity. Fewer people meant higher wages, better working conditions, and the end of feudalism. That might be true, but for you, here and now, with your fever and your rat roommates, the future feels less like progress and more like an exhausting lottery of survival. You write a will. You don't own much. A wooden spoon, a belt with a nice buckle, a dog named Smudge. You leave it all to your cousin Goethe, assuming she hasn't died in the past 24 hours. As you drift into a sweaty sleep, you hear singing outside your window. A group of children, still alive, still hopeful, their voices thin but sweet. They sing a little song about roses, pockets, ashes. It sounds cheerful until you remember that it's probably about mass graves. And with that, the night pulls you under. By the time the second wave rolls in, you're not even surprised. The smell of death is practically background noise now, like the clatter of hooves, or that one neighbor who sings slightly off-key hymns at sunrise. You've grown used to the sight of empty stalls, shuttered windows, and the lingering taste of panic in the back of your throat. Welcome back to the Black Death, version 2, now with more panic and even fewer physicians. The town has changed. Where once there were crowds and clamor, now there's space, too much space. Streets echo. Doors remain ajar, swinging gently in the breeze like half-hearted invitations to come inside and catch whatever's left. You pass a man in robes, rich ones, dyed in actual indigo, and you watch him cough into a silk handkerchief. The color drains from his face when he notices a swelling near his collarbone. You don't speak, but your eyes say it all. Good luck, buddy. By now, the words bubo and contagion are part of your everyday vocabulary. Buboes, those angry, boil-like swellings, typically under the arms, neck or groin, that make your body feel like a cursed fruit left out in the sun. You've seen them rupture. You've seen them ooze. You've smelled things you can never unsmell. It's like your nose has developed a memory, and it is not letting you forget. Every few hours, the bell rings. It's not a church service. It's a death toll. Literally, a low, mournful clang that marks each new soul shuffled off this medieval coil. The bell ringers are a grim little fraternity, half priest, half gravedigger. Their robes are stained, their faces hidden, and their jobs endless. You give them a nod as they pass. You're not friends, exactly, but you recognize each other in that quiet, end-of-the-world sort of way. One of the strangest things, the plague doesn't hit everyone equally. Some households drop in days. Others seem untouched, even if they sleep next to the infected. Historians still argue whether certain bloodlines held resistance, or if it was sheer dumb luck and social distancing before it had a name. You suspect it's a mix of luck, and the fact that some people are just better at not licking their fingers after touching rats. You've noticed some recurring habits. Burn everything, smell herbs constantly, and never, under any circumstances, touch a priest who's been in 3 houses that day. You carry a little posy of dried lavender and thyme, part fashion accessory, part air filter. It doesn't work, but it feels like it should. Meanwhile, the city officials try to pretend everything's under control. They enforce curfews, block off infected areas with nailed-up boards, and pay people to dump lime over mass graves. They even write cheerful public notices encouraging cleanliness. You'd laugh, but you're too dehydrated to produce actual tears. And then there's the music. Yes, music. Strange, right? But people cope how they can. You hear lute songs drifting through the streets, some haunting, some oddly upbeat. There's a traveling troupe of musicians who play dirges and drink heavily and insist they're warding off the plague through song. One guy swears the sound vibrations disrupt the disease. You think he just likes attention. Now and then, you see the doctors, the ones in the bird masks, beaked like storks, black-robed, eyes glinting through glass. They glide through the streets like omens. Children hide when they pass. Dogs bark, then whimper. You asked one, once, what was in the beak. He told you, rose petals, mint, camphor, and a sprinkle of crushed emerald. To cleanse the air, he said. To impress women, you suspected. Ironically, many of these plague doctors weren't even medically trained. Some were just bold volunteers, or unfortunate interns before internships were cool. A few made decent money, danger pay, you suppose, but most died pretty quickly. Still, they looked great doing it. Historians still debate whether their gear actually helped reduce infection, or if it was just a terrifying fashion statement. Of course, faith plays a huge role. Churches are full to bursting. Well, they were, before half the clergy got sick too. You know of a friar who tried to baptize 10 plague victims in a single morning. By sundown, he was dead, and so were the 10. Some say it was a holy sign. Others say he really should have used gloves. But even in all this, there's dark comedy. You once saw 2 men fighting over a plague remedy made of powdered unicorn horn. It was actually crushed narwhal tusk, sold at an outrageous price. The seller vanished overnight, either scammed everyone and skipped town, or exploded from karma. Hard to say. Then there are the cures. Let's review, shall we? Rub onions on your sores. Carry toads in your pockets. Smear crushed rubies across your chest. Bake yourself briefly in a brick oven. Yes, like a scone. Someone even suggests walking around with a freshly killed chicken strapped to your armpit, which raises questions. Where are all these chickens coming from? And do they give consent? Still, you try a few. Not because you believe in them, but because hope is stubborn. And medieval. Hope says, maybe this weird ritual will work. Maybe this time it'll be different. And hey, if you're gonna die, you might as well smell like basil and poultry. You sit on your stoop one twilight, watching the sun set over a strangely quiet skyline. A cart rolls by. 3 more bodies. You recognize one of them, a merchant who once gave you a discount on figs. No ceremony. No shroud. Just a thin layer of cloth and a prayer that feels half-hearted. You look up. A single bird crosses the sky. You're not sure if it's a good sign or just hungry. And through it all, life limps on. Somehow. Babies are still born. Bread is still baked. And every now and then, someone cracks a joke that actually makes you laugh, even if it ends in a coughing fit. You go to bed that night under a thick blanket, clutching your herb sachet like a medieval teddy bear. You dream of bells and birds and boiling onions. And when you wake up, if you wake up, you'll do it all again. You wake to the sound of scraping metal and muttered prayers. A man stands over you with a bag of tools and a look that says he's either about to save your life or ruin your week. He's a barber surgeon, the medieval equivalent of a Swiss Army knife with bloodstains. He cuts hair, pulls teeth, lances boils, and occasionally sews people back together, though not necessarily in that order. Today, he's here for your mysterious swelling. You sit up, woozy. The room is hot and smells like old sweat and panic. The surgeon offers you a slug of wine, then rummages through his bag. You catch glimpses of saws, knives, a small iron rod that looks suspiciously like a fireplace poker, and something that may have once been a pigeon. "Just a routine procedure," he says cheerfully. "We'll drain the bubo, purge the humors, and maybe bleed you a little, just to be safe." Bloodletting is the go-to cure for pretty much anything. Fever? Bloodletting. Headache? Bloodletting. Slightly out of sorts? You guessed it. Get that blood out. The logic is based on the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one, and you're imbalanced. Balance is health. And balance, it turns out, requires sharp things and towels. You lie back and grit your teeth as he opens a vein in your arm with the delicate touch of someone slicing bread after 2 drinks. Blood trickles down into a bowl. You're told not to worry. This is perfectly normal. You glance at the blood-soaked towel beside you and wonder if it was also perfectly normal for the last guy. Historians still argue whether bloodletting ever truly helped, or if it was simply a dramatic way of saying, "We're doing something." Either way, the real miracle is that anyone survived long enough to question it. After the bleeding comes the application of various pastes and poultices. Your bubo is smeared with a thick grey salve made of clay, vinegar, crushed herbs, and, you suspect, a hint of wishful thinking. Then comes the pigeon. Yes, the pigeon. He presses the still warm bird against your sore. It flaps once in protest, then goes still. "You'll thank me," he says. You do not. If you're lucky, the wound doesn't get infected. If you're unlucky, it does, and now you've got gangrene, which is like getting promoted, except the promotion involves rot and amputation. Barber surgeons often double as tooth pullers, bone setters, and minor executioners. Their shops are where people go for help when no one else will touch them. You once saw a man have his legs sawn off after falling from a cart. They gave him a leather strap to bite and a pewter cup to scream into. He survived. He even danced again, just less symmetrically. You leave your session with your arm bandaged, your head swimming, and a vague suspicion that you've just participated in a medieval dare. You stagger home past a group of townsfolk lining up outside an apothecary. The man inside sells potions, powders, and the occasional miraculous elixir that's mostly wine with a handful of cloves. You buy a small pouch labeled, "To drive out demons and winds." It smells like an herb garden and your grandmother's attic. You hang it around your neck like a charm. It won't help, but it feels right. Of course, not all cures are surgical. There's the sweating cure, where you're bundled in layers of blankets, made to drink hot liquids, and placed near a fire until you resemble boiled ham. Some say it purges toxins. Others say it cooks the patient. You tried it once. You hallucinated a dancing goat reciting Bible verses. Unclear if that was a success. There's also cupping, placing hot glass bowls on the skin to draw the illness to the surface. You saw someone get cupped so hard they looked like a bruised melon. No idea if it worked, but his back made interesting conversation for weeks. And let's not forget the humble leech. These slippery little creatures are beloved by doctors who swear they suck out bad blood and restore harmony. You've had a few attached to your arm. One got stuck. You named it Gerald. He was a surprisingly calming presence until he fell off into your soup. Still, there's something strangely comforting about the ritual of treatment. The idea that people are trying to heal you, even if their methods include bird parts and boiling onions. At least it's better than doing nothing, right? Then again, some treatments are worse than the disease. A noblewoman you know once applied powdered emerald to her eyes to cure the plague. She's blind now. Another man wore a belt made of wolf fur, convinced it repelled evil spirits. It repelled everyone else too. You attend a local healing ceremony in the village square. There's incense, chanting, and a man in robes slapping people with a branch dipped in holy water. One woman faints. A child vomits. Someone's chicken escapes and disrupts the entire ritual. The priest takes it as a sign. Of what? No one is sure. Your wound festers a bit but doesn't kill you. Yet, that's the real medieval superpower. Not dying immediately. Every extra sunrise feels like winning a cosmic lottery. You begin to believe you might actually pull through. Maybe even thrive. Maybe you'll open a shop that sells only non-poisonous bread. That night, you fall asleep with your arm wrapped in linen, your charm pouch under your pillow, and the faint lingering smell of herbal pigeon in your nostrils. A strange comfort settles over you, and for the first time in weeks, you dream of nothing at all. You wake up with your legs twitching. Not just an occasional jerk, full-on, uncontrollable tapping like you're trying to send Morse code to the underworld. Your feet won't stop moving. Neither will your arms. And by the time the sun peeks over the rooftops, you're dancing. Literally. You stumble into the street, still half asleep, flailing like a marionette in the hands of an enthusiastic toddler. You're not alone. Dozens of others are there too, twisting, leaping, sweating through their tunics, their faces locked in expressions that hover somewhere between ecstasy and dread. It's one woman begins, days ago. She dances in the market square until her feet bleed. No music, no laughter, just desperate, relentless movement. People gather to watch. Then, without warning, others join in. You were one of them. You don't remember deciding to. You just remember your body saying, "We're doing this now," and your brain tagging along like a confused intern. Some blame the heat. Others suspect demonic possession. A few propose poison, something tainted in the grain maybe. Ergot, a mold that makes bread go bad and minds go stranger. Historians still argue whether the outbreak was physical, psychological, spiritual, or all three in a tragic medieval smoothie. But in the moment, you're not worried about cause. You're worried about falling face first into a pig trough while mid-pirouette. Your muscles ache. Your toes blister. You try to stop. You want to stop. But your body keeps swaying, skipping, lunging. You pass a neighbor who's sobbing as he twirls. A child waltzes by, eyes wide with fear. You've never been so exhausted. You've also never felt quite so alive. City officials are, predictably, panicking. At first, they call for more musicians. Yes, seriously. They believe the only way out is through. If you're going to dance, you might as well do it in rhythm. They bring in drummers, fiddlers, flute players. The square becomes a chaotic open-air concert where the audience is also the performance and the tragedy. You remember the music being oddly uplifting, which is weird given how many people collapse mid-step. Some convulse on the ground, twitching as though their feet are still dancing. A few never get back up. Heat stroke, heart failure, hysteria. Historians disagree on the cause of death, but they do agree. A surprising number of people died of dancing. One local physician suggests the illness is caused by hot blood. His cure? Bloodletting naturally. You avoid his tent after watching him nick a man's ear with a butter knife and declare him healed. Another doctor recommends being submerged in freezing water. You pass. The river's full of frogs, and honestly, you're not ready to die cold and wet. Religious leaders, meanwhile, propose divine punishment. The punishment for what, exactly, is unclear. Pride? Sin? That time the town staged a particularly raunchy harvest festival? The town erects a shrine to Saint Vitus, patron of dancers and people with trembling limbs. You crawl there one night, hoping for mercy. Instead, you find a sweaty huddle of fellow dancers, praying and shivering, ankle-deep in flower petals and spilled wine. As strange as it sounds, you begin to bond with your fellow sufferers. You recognize people now. There's the bearded man who spins like a top every evening, the widow who glides as if possessed, the kid who breakdances suspiciously well for 1518. You all share this bizarre nightmare, and somehow that makes it easier. Someone brings bread. Someone else brings water. Someone else, uninvited, brings their bagpipes and immediately gets pelted with fruit. You're not sure if it's mass psychosis, spiritual crisis, or just one long fever dream. But it's real. The blisters are real. The deaths are real. The ache in your back is very real. And yet, part of you doesn't want it to end. There's something freeing in the madness. No chores, no plague carts, no bills to pay, because let's be honest, you're broke, and the economy is mostly barter-based anyway. It's just you, your limbs, and whatever rhythm the town decides to unleash today. You overhear a merchant claim this is all caused by overheated wounds. You nod slowly and walk away before he starts suggesting how to cool them. Some scholars will later theorize that this was a stress response, an outlet for the collective trauma of war, famine, and disease. A medieval form of breakdown where your soul says, no thanks, and your body defaults to interpretive dance. Honestly, that tracks. Eventually, after weeks of non-stop movement, the spell breaks. The music stops. Your legs give out. And somehow, that feels more dangerous than the dancing itself. The quiet settles like dust. You're suddenly aware of how sore you are, how dirty, how deeply weird everything has become. You limp home, covered in grime, vaguely remembering doing a cartwheel over someone's cabbage stall. In the days that follow, the city puts away its fiddles. The shrine to Saint Vitus gets more candles than ever. And the townsfolk, those who survived, go back to their lives, pretending they didn't just conquer themselves into near oblivion. You don't talk about it much. It's easier that way. But when someone mentions an ache in their feet or a sudden craving for music, you exchange a quiet glance, a flicker of memory, a shared whisper, remember the dancing? You do. And your knees remember it too. You notice the patch one morning while washing in a chipped wooden basin. It's pale at first, like a dry flake of skin on your forearm. You scratch it. It doesn't go away. The next day, it's darker, raised, strangely numb. By the end of the week, it has company, a few more patches, a strange tingling in your fingers, and a creeping sense of dread. You know what it is. Everyone does. It's leprosy. Your first thought isn't fear. It's shame. In medieval society, leprosy isn't just a disease, it's a divine punishment. People think it's your fault, your soul's fault, some secret sin that's finally bubbled to the surface, like an oozing wound. Never mind that historians now believe it's caused by Mycobacterium leprae, a bacteria that spreads through respiratory droplets. Back then, it's God handing out receipts. You wrap your arms in cloth and keep to yourself. You walk with your head down. You skip Mass, not because you don't believe, but because you don't want to hear the whispers. One day, the local priest visits. He doesn't get too close. He asks you to consider the community. You know what that means. By nightfall, your belongings are packed. A sack of stale bread, a worn blanket, a little coin. You leave without ceremony. You don't even get a hug goodbye. Just a silent sideways glance from your neighbor, the same one you once helped repair a fence. She doesn't wave. You walk past the edge of town, across fields and forest paths, toward the stone house. Every region has one. A leprosarium, a hospital for those afflicted. But let's not get romantic. It's more prison than haven. Cold stone walls, iron-bolted doors, a little chapel, a garden that never quite blooms. You're met by a caretaker who avoids eye contact and shows you to a cell-like room with a cot stuffed with straw. You're lucky, it's not full. Yet, you're issued a bell, not for decoration, not to summon help, it's to warn others. You are now required by law and superstition to ring that bell when you travel, to ring it as you approach town gates, to ring it as you pass others on the road. It is a sound not of invitation, but alarm. Ding ding, it says. Someone unclean is near. Please panic accordingly. You're not contagious in the way people think. Leprosy spreads slowly. It's not the medieval sprint of plague, it's a slow, creeping disfigurement. Nerve damage first, then fingers, toes, sometimes facial features. You've seen old sufferers with missing noses and hollow cheeks. They look like ghosts, even in the daylight. Historians still argue whether the stigma around leprosy was entirely religious or partly practical. The disfigurement scared people. The longevity meant sufferers lingered for years, decades, and the church leaned into it hard, equating the disease with moral decay. Some sermons went so far as to claim that lepers died before death, souls exiled in their own bodies. And yet, in the stone house, something odd happens. You find peace. It's quiet. No yelling in the streets, no overcrowded taverns, no dancing plagues, just slow days filled with gardening, prayer, mending old clothes, and watching the sky change. You meet others like you. A woman who once owned a bakery. A monk who lost half his foot. A boy no older than 12, still laughing, still mischievous. You form a sort of family. The broken kind. The honest kind. One day, a visitor arrives. A wealthy woman, veiled and perfumed, offers donations to the hospital in exchange for a safe, prayerful blessing. She won't come closer than 10 feet. You watch her leave with an uneasy smile. Charity without compassion is like bread without yeast, flat and vaguely disappointing. You still ring your bell, out of habit now. But it no longer feels like punishment. It feels like a song only a few can hear. A club of outcasts who found strange comfort in each other's presence. You trade stories, scars, sometimes even jokes. One man makes puppets from old rags and puts on shows about saints. They're terrible, and everyone loves them. Every so often, someone gets worse. They stop eating. They cry through the night, and then they stop altogether. There's no ceremony, just a wrapped body, a shallow grave, a prayer murmured by the rest of you, while the bell tolls faintly in the wind. But there are moments of light, too. On rare feast days, you're allowed back into town, briefly. You cover up. You keep to the shadows. Still, you see old friends from afar. One even gives you a nod. That nod stays with you for months. And here's the thing, you haven't died. Your skin has changed. Your face maybe. But you're still here. Still thinking. Still feeling. Still whispering prayers before sleep. Still dreaming. Not all who suffered from leprosy died of it. Many lived long lives in the margins, carving out meaning in silence and shadow. In some places, lepers were allowed to work, farm, even marry other lepers. Others were given last rites while still alive, a cruel ritual of social death. You wonder sometimes if your body has betrayed you or simply told you a truth others ignore, that we're all just a few mistakes, a few microbes away from exile. You fall asleep that night listening to the wind move through the stone house, your bell hanging beside your bed like a forgotten melody. You dream not of towns or cures, but of fields without fences and faces that do not turn away. You find the monastery by accident, lost in the hills after fleeing yet another town that wanted nothing to do with your persistent cough and suspicious pallor. You spot the old stone walls through a foggy morning veil. It's quiet, but there's smoke rising from the chimney and a bell tolling the hour. So either it's occupied or haunted. At this point, you're fine with either. The wooden gate creaks open. A monk greets you, not with fear or judgment, but with a bowl of stew and a weary smile. You're not asked questions, just shown where to wash, where to sleep, and where the latrines are, important, since you're still half convinced your insides are liquefying. Welcome to sanctuary. Welcome to the monastery. Now, let's set expectations. This isn't a cozy inn with down pillows and warm cider. It's damp, drafty, and smells like turnips and unwashed linen. The floors creak, the beds are straw, and the herbal tea tastes suspiciously like boiled dandelions. But it's safe, and after weeks of dodging plague carts and being chased out of towns by men with pitchforks, safety feels like a luxury. The monks are a curious bunch, stoic mostly. They shuffle around in brown robes, muttering prayers, tending to gardens, copying texts by candlelight, and constantly looking mildly disappointed with the world. Some are kind. Some are terrifying. One has a laugh like thunder and an unsettling affection for fermented beets. They offer shelter to the sick, not out of ignorance, but faith. Charity is their duty, and they take it seriously. But here's the twist. Monasteries, for all their piety, are not exactly paragons of sanitation. In fact, they're accidental breeding grounds for disease. For one thing, there are rats. So many rats. Bold, clever rats that run along rafters like they own the place. You swear one winked at you while stealing a crust of bread. And where there are rats, there are fleas. Well, you already know how that story goes. Monks try to keep things clean. They really do. There are rules about hand washing, bathing, and waste disposal. But when your entire building is made of stone, and the water for cleaning comes from the same stream where someone upstream is dumping goat entrails, hygiene is more of a wish than a reality. You're assigned a simple routine. Wake before dawn, pray, work in the garden or kitchen, more prayer, then sleep. In between, you help care for the sick, change linens, boil water, comfort the dying. You watch as monks tend to wounds with gentle hands and strange concoctions, garlic poultices, honey salves, wine rinses. Some of it seems to help. Some of it seems to do something, at least. There's one monk, Brother Ralph, who swears by a syrup made of fennel and vinegar. He insists it prevents infection. He also once told you that dreams are caused by demons nibbling your ears, so you're still evaluating his credibility. Despite their medical limitations, monasteries often had the best libraries in the region. You spend long afternoons flipping through dusty volumes on astrology, herbalism, and ancient medical theory. Some ideas are centuries old, like the belief that the moon influences the balance of your humors. Others are newer, possibly French, and involve leeches in increasingly creative places. Historians still argue whether medieval monks advanced medicine or simply preserved it. On one hand, they copied ancient texts that would have been lost forever. On the other, they also insisted that sneezing repelled demons and that dreams about chickens were omens. It's a mixed bag. But they do one thing better than anyone else: care. Here, you're not a burden. You're not cursed. You're just sick. And sometimes, that's all a person needs, to be seen as a human being with a soul, not a walking warning sign. That said, You still sleep with one eye open. The guy in the next cot talks to himself and tried to sell you a spoon he carved from stale cheese. You declined. One evening, a nun visits from a nearby convent with a basket of herbs and a look that could stun a bear. She teaches you how to make an ointment from comfrey and beeswax. It smells like wet socks, but soothes your rash. You thank her. She blesses you and disappears into the mist like some divine apothecary ninja. Over time, you begin to recover. Not completely, your lungs still rattle, and you're occasionally feverish, but you're stronger. You walk farther. You eat more. You laugh at Brother Ralph's terrible beat-based jokes. You almost feel normal again. And then, one day, a cart arrives bearing 3 sick villagers. They're worse than you ever were, gasping, twitching, covered in spots. The monks don't flinch. They lift them gently, clean their wounds, offer warm broth. But you feel something sink in your stomach. You know what's coming. Within days, more fall ill. The dormitory smells like sweat and death. Prayers become desperate. Brother Ralph stops joking. You overhear a monk muttering about whether this is divine punishment for letting in too many outsiders. You feel the familiar shame creep back into your bones. One by one, the monks fall. You help bury them in the garden. Simple wooden markers, no names, just dates, and a bell rung slowly, 7 times for each soul. You ring it until your arms ache, but not all is lost. A few survive. You tend to the garden again, alone. Pull weeds, water the herbs, read by the window as wind stirs the parchment. It's quiet, still, and if you close your eyes, you can almost forget that it starts with a tiny, painless sore. You don't even notice it at first. A red dot just below your lip, maybe a scratch from shaving, or a reaction to that questionable goat cheese you ate yesterday. But it doesn't go away. In fact, it starts to weep, just a little. Then another appears, and another. Within days, your mouth feels like it's been cursed. You've caught the pox, not chicken pox, not smallpox. No, the great pox, syphilis. The disease that will go on to shame kings, ruin dynasties, and give court painters a creative challenge when it comes to noses. Welcome to the most scandalous sickness of the medieval world. You're not entirely sure where you picked it up. A tavern? A bathhouse? That inexplicably charming lute player with too many teeth and not enough discretion? Doesn't matter. What matters is that you now have a disease that half the continent is whispering about, but no one wants to admit having. You keep it secret for a while. Hide the sores. Cover your face with a scarf. Claim you're suffering from winter chapping. But the signs stack up fast. Mouth ulcers, bone pain, rashes, hair falling out in suspicious little tufts, and then the worst part, the smell. You smell off. Like spoiled meat dunked in rosewater and shame. Syphilis is a shapeshifter. It doesn't kill you quickly. It lingers. It changes you. Some stages are silent. Some scream through your body. Historians still debate where it came from. Brought back from the New World? Mutated from an older skin disease? A divine punishment for too much dancing and not enough penance? No one agrees. What they do agree on is how destructive it becomes. Royalty gets it. Nobles, scholars, priests. Even people who consider themselves very important and morally superior. The French call it the Neapolitan disease. The Italians call it the French disease. The English, the Spanish sickness. Everyone blames someone else. A truly international game of not it. Your own case progresses. One morning, your nose starts to collapse. Not metaphorically, physically. It begins to sink, the cartilage eaten away by the disease. You stare into a hand mirror and barely recognize the face looking back. You wonder if that's really you, or someone you used to be. There are treatments, of course, if you're feeling brave or desperate, the most popular one. Mercury. Yes, mercury, as in the metal, as in extremely toxic. Physicians recommend rubbing it on your sores, or inhaling the vapors, or, if you're feeling fancy, bathing in it. A night with Venus, they say, and a lifetime with Mercury. It's not just a metaphor, it's a terrifyingly literal prescription. You try the ointment, it burns, it peels, it does something. The sores scab over, briefly. But then your gums bleed. Your breath turns metallic. Your fingers tremble. Congratulations, you're being slowly poisoned in an effort to slow a disease that's already killing you. There's also sweating therapy, where you're placed in a sealed room, covered in thick blankets, and made to sweat profusely for hours. The idea is to purge the bad humors. The result is a dehydrated, dizzy, and increasingly regretful version of yourself who now also smells like boiled cabbage. You hear stories of people fleeing to the countryside, hoping the clean air and herbal teas will heal them. A nobleman you once met built an entire estate in the mountains, isolated himself, and hired 6 apothecaries. He died raving about snakes under his skin and refused to be buried near water. Artists begin painting the pox, not just the symptoms, but the drama, the decay, the horror. One woodcut shows a skeleton dancing with a pustule-covered maiden. Another shows a doctor in a pointed hat offering a mercury-laced potion to a grinning patient with a crater for a nose. Art imitating disease and fear. You wear a mask when you go out, not to protect others but to hide. A veil, a scarf, a wide-brimmed hat tilted low. Some towns ban pox sufferers entirely. Others quietly usher them into isolation hospitals. If you're poor, you end up in the gutter. If you're rich, you simply retreat to your villa and die in privacy, surrounded by awkward silence and wilted flowers. Yet, amid all this decay, something weird happens. You survive. Not fully healed, but no longer worsening. The sores dry. The rashes fade. Your bones still ache in the rain, and your reflection still startles you, but you're alive. Still standing. Still breathing. You meet others like you. A woman missing most of her upper lip, but with the sharpest wit you've ever heard. A man who walks with a limp and paints beautifully grotesque frescoes of saints battling serpents, survivors, mutants, the scarred and the sacred. Historians still argue whether syphilis changed society or just exposed what was already rotting. It rewrote medicine, inspired fear-based morality laws, and taught people the hard way that beautiful faces can hide dangerous secrets. You become wary of intimacy, careful with touch, not out of shame but survival. You learn to read the signs in others, the faint sniffle, the patch of skin they won't show, the eyes that dart too quickly. One day, a child points at you and whispers, "Is that man cursed?" His mother hushes him, but you just smile, crooked, soft, tired. You walk on, still poxed, still proud, because some diseases disfigure, some destroy, but some simply remain, reminders of a life lived in a world that never stops being dangerous and never stops being yours. You wake to the sound of coughing. Not your own, this time. High-pitched, rapid, desperate, coming from the next room, where the fire has long since gone out and the walls are thin enough to hear everything. You know that cough. Everyone does. You hear it so often. It's practically the soundtrack of medieval life. It's a child. You rise slowly, your bones aching from the damp. It rained last night, again, and your ceiling leaked. again. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is that another child is sick, and in this world, sick rarely means a day of bed rest and extra soup. It means, well, you've seen what it means. You light a small taper and press your ear to the wall. The coughing hasn't stopped. It's relentless, like the child is trying to expel something her lungs no longer want. You hear her mother's soft shushing, a lullaby weaving around the wheezes. The melody is familiar, sweet. But now it sounds more like a farewell than a comfort. Childhood in the Middle Ages is not what modern folks might imagine. It's short, fragile. A game of dice with disease, famine, and fate. Nearly half of all children born never reach adulthood. Many don't even make it past their first year, and no matter how many times it happens, the grief never softens. You remember when it happened to you. Not that you were the child, but that you had one. A daughter, small and bright-eyed, with a laugh like wind chimes, and a stubborn streak that could stop a horse mid-gallop. She caught a fever one winter, and within 3 days she was gone. You buried her in a frozen patch of earth that wouldn't dig deep enough. You still dream about her, sometimes. There's no shortage of childhood diseases in your time. Measles, whooping cough, diphtheria, typhoid, and the dreaded scarlet fever, which turns their cheeks rosy and their skin hot, and their fate nearly certain. Treatment is limited. You might call the village healer, who brings with her a pouch of crushed herbs and a copper amulet, or the priest, who recites prayers and dabs holy water on the child's forehead while everyone else looks away, pretending not to count the child's labored breaths. Sometimes, someone suggests bloodletting, even for toddlers. You punch that person in the nose. They deserve it. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine helped children or simply comforted the parents. Some folk remedies involved placing a charm under the child's pillow or whispering blessings into their ears. Others were stranger, burying a piece of the child's clothing at a crossroads or smearing honey on the soles of their feet to draw out the sickness. Nothing works. Not really. You've attended so many child funerals you've memorized the songs. Soft, simple verses, sung by tear-choked voices, accompanied by the creak of the coffin cart and the rustle of funeral shrouds. The graves are always too small. Even lullabies carry death's shadow. You catch yourself humming one, Ring Around the Rosy, a pocket full of posies. You pause. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Chilling, isn't it? What passes for a child's song may just be a coded survival chant. But not all is bleak. Some children do survive. Miraculously, stubbornly, they fight through the fevers and rashes and come out the other side with stronger lungs and crooked smiles. These children are celebrated like heroes. The neighbors bring bread. Someone knits a new scarf. The priest awkwardly pats their head and claims their recovery is a sign from the heavens. The child shrugs and asks for more soup. You see one such child today, little Marta, the blacksmith's daughter. 2 weeks ago, she was ashen and limp. Today, she's climbing a tree barefoot, singing about a goose. You marvel at her resilience. You want to wrap her in wool and prayers and never let her near another crowded market again. But life doesn't allow that. Children work, just like adults. They herd animals, carry water, run errands, help in workshops. If they're lucky, they attend school, usually run by the church, where they learn Latin, religious songs, and the fine art of trying not to sneeze during sermons. And yet, for all the hardship, there is joy. There's laughter. There are games, simple ones, played with sticks, pebbles, or imagination. Children skip rope, chase each other, build tiny cities out of mud and broken roof tiles. They play, even when the world around them is falling apart. Maybe because it is. There's also hope. Every birth is a celebration, cautious but real. Midwives are treated like mystical beings, wielding herbs and whispered wisdom. A baby born strong, with a loud cry and 10 tiny fingers, is considered a gift. Some parents give thanks by donating to the church. Others simply light a candle and exhale the breath they've been holding for 9 months. Of course, if the child is born during a plague outbreak or famine year, that joy is mixed with dread. You've seen mothers hide their babies when strangers pass by, just in case someone decides to blame the child for their bad harvest. Superstition is cruel that way. But tonight, you focus on that coughing girl next door. You hear the lullaby slow, the coughs fade. A sigh. Silence. You don't know if that means peace or passing. You don't knock. You just sit by your window, watching the fog roll in, and offer a quiet prayer, just in case someone needs it. Because in a world where children vanish like morning mist, every night they make it through feels like a miracle. Someone's goat died last night. Which, normally, would be unfortunate, but not exactly dramatic. Except now, your neighbor is convinced it's your fault. Why? Because 3 days ago, you picked some herbs near her fence. Because you own a black cat. Because you muttered something about bad air during that thunderstorm and wore a lavender sachet around your neck. Obviously, you're a witch. And obviously, witches cause disease. You don't even get the chance to laugh before she spits on your doorstep and starts shouting about curses. You barely get a word in before 2 more neighbors are there, crossing themselves and eyeing you like you're about to summon frogs from your sleeves. Uneven says you looked at his crops funny last Tuesday. Welcome to medieval medicine's least scientific theory, blame the outsider. When disease strikes and reason fails, superstition steps in with confidence. And during outbreaks, be it plague, pox, or some fever no one has named yet, the blame game begins. Someone must be responsible. It can't just be fleas, or spoiled grain, or the villagers' collective misunderstanding of hygiene. No, it must be Agnes, who reads too much and knows what oregano is. Witches, healers, midwives, and women who own more than 2 books are popular targets. You've seen it happen before. Someone gets sick, and suddenly the old woman with the mole and the garden full of mugwort is getting dragged to the church for questioning. Sometimes it's worse. Torture, public trials, tests involving cold water and floating, which make no sense but look impressive. Historians still argue whether witch trials were more about disease or control, about scapegoating the vulnerable or asserting religious power. Likely, it's both. You've even heard tales of entire towns turning on their Jewish populations during plague years, accusing them of poisoning wells or summoning death through rituals. Mass expulsions, pogroms, violence disguised as preventative medicine. It's terrifying how quickly fear becomes cruelty. But here's the odd twist. The very people accused of spreading disease were often the ones trying to cure it. Agnes, for example, actually makes decent salves. She taught you to mash marigold petals into goose fat and apply it to rashes. It helped. She grows garlic, knows which mushrooms to avoid, and once cured your neighbor's stubborn cough with thyme syrup and threats. But because she isn't a licensed doctor, meaning a man with a robe and an opinion, her knowledge is seen as suspicious. You visit her anyway, late at night, when the gossip has cooled and the village has moved on to some new drama involving a chicken theft and an angry blacksmith. Her cottage smells like rosemary and damp earth. She's hunched, but her eyes are sharp. She doesn't talk much, just gestures to the pot over the fire and hands you a cup of something steaming and bitter. You drink. You don't ask what it is. You just feel the warmth slide down into your bones like a soft warning. She tells you disease doesn't care who you are or what you believe. It comes like fog, silent, smothering, indifferent. But people care. Too much. They want order. They want someone to blame. They want a target. She also tells you not to pick herbs in front of paranoid women with sick goats. Fair enough. You ask her how she learned all this. She shrugs. From my mother, and from paying attention. Then she hands you a jar of something dark and sticky and tells you to rub it behind your ears if the fever comes back. You nod, leave a few coins, and slip out the back. The next morning, a town crier reads a new edict. All herbalists must register with the church. All charms must be burned. Anyone found invoking unnatural cures will be questioned. You keep Agnes's jar hidden under a floorboard. Superstition isn't all darkness. Sometimes it's just confusion in a world that makes no sense. People draw symbols above their doors, wear saint medallions, scatter salt in corners. You once saw someone bury a toad in a box with nails to keep bad spirits away. It didn't help, but the toad had a great burial. Even the nobility aren't immune. Kings commission astrologers to tell them which days are safe to bathe. Queens refuse to visit cities unless the stars are in favorable alignment. A bishop once delayed a public prayer event because Mercury was in retrograde. You didn't even know Mercury had opinions on medieval prayer logistics. Still, amid all the absurdity, there's comfort in ritual. Lighting a candle, saying a chant, tying a ribbon to a tree. Maybe it doesn't stop the disease, but it feels like it does. Sometimes feeling like you're doing something is enough to stay sane, but not always. You return home to find someone's drawn a chalk mark on your door. A crude X. A silent accusation. You wash it away quickly, heart pounding. You don't want to end up like Agnes, or worse. And yet, the next day, she's still there. Still making tea. Still tending her garden. Still muttering to her cat, who might also be named Agnes. You wonder if the key to survival isn't just herbs or prayers, but persistence. Refusing to disappear, even when the world wants to pin its illness on your back. So, when someone else falls ill and starts pointing fingers, you quietly remind them about that time Agnes cured their son's fever. Or the way she fixed the midwife's broken ankle with willow bark and sheer intimidation. They don't thank you, but they stop knocking on her door. That night, you light a candle. Just a small one. Not for magic, not for saints, just for the ones who keep healing, even when you wake up hungry. Not the kind of hungry that a crust of bread or a bowl of stew can solve. The kind of hollow, gnawing emptiness that starts in your belly and seeps into your bones. It's not just you. The whole village is quieter now. No laughter, no trading. Just the slow, dragging shuffle of people conserving energy they don't have. Famine has arrived. The weather's been wrong for 3 years. Too wet, too cold, too unpredictable. Crops have failed. Grain stores are empty. Livestock are dying or long since eaten. Even the rats seem leaner, though they still show up, stubborn as ever, gnawing on boots and hope alike. Bread is scarce. And when it is available, it's suspicious, darker, heavier. Made from rye, oats, or whatever else can be ground into something vaguely edible. You chew a slice and try not to think about how it smells, musty, sharp, a bit like moldy books left in a damp cellar. And then things get weird. You start seeing things, so do others. A boy claims the clouds are speaking Latin. A woman screams that her hands are made of snakes. You wake up sweating, convinced there are beetles under your skin. You scratch until your arms are raw. And when you blink, the walls seem to breathe. Welcome to ergotism. It's not divine punishment. It's not madness. It's mold. Ergot, to be exact, a fungus that infects rye and, when baked into bread, turns dinner into a psychedelic nightmare. Some call it holy fire. Others, St. Anthony's fire. The hallucinations are just the beginning. The real horror is what it does to your limbs. First, your fingers go numb. Then, black. Then, they fall off. Historians still argue whether entire outbreaks of bewitchment were actually mass ergot poisoning. Did people dance, scream, and convulse because they were cursed, or because they were tripping on fungal bread? Honestly, both sound plausible in this century. The irony? You eat the bread knowing it might make you sick, because the alternative is starving. You've heard of people boiling leather shoes for soup, roasting roots that might be poisonous. Even though no one says it out loud, graver acts of desperation. The forest, once full of rabbits and birds, is eerily quiet. No animals. Just people picking through nettles and hoping the next berry isn't deadly. You wander into the fields one morning, hoping to find something. Anything. A mushroom. A forgotten onion. What you find instead is a group of villagers arguing over a patch of wild turnips. One has a knife. The others have stones. You walk away before it turns ugly. Back in the village, someone tries to sell you flour made from crushed bones and old seed husks. You pass. You'd rather hallucinate snakes than eat whatever that is. Then there's the cold. Famine doesn't come alone. It brings friends, disease, despair, and biting winter winds. You wrap yourself in every layer you own and still shiver through the night. Your neighbors burn furniture to stay warm. One family burns a fence. Another, their heirloom chest. You can smell the desperation in the smoke. And yet, amid all this bleakness, someone finds a turnip. A real one. Edible. Not cursed. It's tiny, knobby, and oddly shaped, but it's food. They boil it and share it with 5 others. You get half a spoonful. It's the best thing you've tasted in weeks. That night, someone starts singing. An old song about spring. It's off-key. Haunting. But somehow, comforting. You join in, voice cracking, throat dry. Others follow. A choir of the half-starved, singing to the empty sky. You remember something you heard once. Famine years create strange solidarity. People who might have ignored each other before now huddle close, share crumbs, whisper dreams about rain and wheat. You've even seen a noblewoman carry water for a peasant child. That wouldn't have happened 3 years ago. Still, not everyone is generous. One man hoards sacks of grain and sells them at absurd prices. When someone accuses him of witchcraft, he laughs and offers a crust for a month's wages. That night, someone breaks into his storehouse and sets it on fire. Grain and greed go up in flames together. The church preaches patience. That hunger is a test of faith, that the righteous will be rewarded in heaven. Easy words to say when your pantry isn't empty. You find yourself praying, not for miracles, but for potatoes. They haven't been introduced yet, but you sense their potential. Something about a starchy, dependable root vegetable just feels right. And then, one day, the sky changes. The clouds shift. The wind warms. There's a smell in the air. Mud, grass, possibility. You see the first green sprout push through the thawing earth. It's barely more than a thread, but it's there. People gather, quiet, watching. No one speaks. You all just look. Because that sprout means food. Eventually, if the rain holds, if the sun returns, if the mold stays away. The baker, long out of business, cleans his oven. The village elder walks with a new spring in her limp. Children, too weak to run, begin to smile again. It's not over. Hunger still gnaws. But now, there's something else. Hope, perhaps. Or stubbornness. Or maybe just the universal instinct to keep going, even when your bread might try to kill you. You go to bed that night with an empty stomach, but a lighter heart. You dream of fields, of golden wheat, of warm loaves, slathered with butter. You're inside a castle, but it doesn't feel grand. It feels like a stone box someone forgot to dust for the last 100 years. Cold seeps through the walls. Damp gathers in corners. The air is thick with the scent of sweat, mildew, and old turnips. You've been here for weeks, maybe months. Time has lost its rhythm, beaten down by the thud of catapult stones and the coughs echoing through the halls. You're under siege, which means no one leaves. No one enters, no fresh food, no trade, no letters from distant cousins complaining about their gout. Just you, a few dozen others, and the constant, low-level dread of being slowly starved or suddenly exploded. And if that weren't enough, now everyone's sick. It starts with a cough, just one. From the young squire who cleans the weapons. He says it's nothing, just dust from the old armory. But 2 days later, he's pale, shivering, and wheezing like a broken set of bellows. Then the cook falls ill. Then the cook's assistant. Then the knight who swore he never gets sick, and once drank rainwater off a horse without consequence. Welcome to the world of siege sickness. See, castles aren't exactly designed for airflow. They're drafty, yes, but not ventilated. And during a siege, all doors are shut, all windows sealed. Fires burn constantly, and everyone's packed in together like chickens in an overambitious stew. Sanitation, minimal. You share chamber pots. Water comes from barrels that now smell suspiciously of mushrooms. The kitchen's been serving salted fish for days, and it's not aging well. Diseases thrive in here. Typhus, dysentery, influenza, tuberculosis. Things with names you don't even know yet, passed from hand to hand, cup to cup, breath to breath. The very walls seem to sweat sickness. You lie on a makeshift bed in a drafty corridor, trying to keep warm with a blanket that smells like a wet dog's regrets. Your stomach growls. You've eaten nothing but barley porridge and dried peas. You miss carrots. You even miss cabbage. The castle's doctor, Sir Gregor, who also serves as the resident falconer for some reason, wanders the halls muttering about bad airs. He recommends burning juniper, lighting tallow candles, and, oddly, sleeping near the last person who tried caught their sleeve on fire and singed their eyebrows. Historians still argue whether castle dwellers during sieges were better off than peasants outside. On the one hand, you've got walls, guards, and a slightly lower chance of being immediately murdered. On the other, you're a sneeze away from communal collapse, and there's no escape. There's also the lice. So many. Lice. They thrive in your clothes, your hair, your bedding. You wake up scratching and wonder if lice ever get tired. You try soap, vinegar, even garlic paste. Nothing helps. A knight confesses he's begun naming his. You consider that a red flag. One of the more optimistic nobles proposes a cleansing fast. You all agree, mostly because there's no food left. The cook's been stretching flour with sawdust. Last week, someone served a pigeon pie made entirely of feathers and hope. To distract from the hunger and the hacking, people begin sharing stories. Tales of heroic ancestors, lost loves, magical springs. One elderly lady tells a ghost story about a knight who died in a siege and now haunts the bread ovens, stealing loaves. You wonder if the ghost might share. There are moments of comedy, too. The guard sneezes mid-watch and accidentally drops his helmet off the wall. It lands squarely on the head of an enemy scout, knocking him out cold. You all cheer from the battlements. It's the most excitement you've had in days. Then there are the darker moments. A boy, no older than 12, dies from fever. His mother doesn't cry. She just folds his blanket, tucks it into a satchel, and returns to stirring soup that's mostly water. Grief here is quiet. There's no space for loud sorrow. One night, a messenger hawk arrives. Its leg bears a tiny scroll. Reinforcements are coming. Hold the walls. Everyone cheers, briefly. Then the hawk dies, possibly of castle cough. You lie awake, watching candlelight flicker on stone. You think about the world outside, open fields, forests, rivers. You'd trade 10 days of protection for 1 minute of fresh air. There's a superstition among the guards. If you dream of a well, your fever will break. You try. You picture clear water, smooth stones, a wooden bucket creaking on its rope. You wake up, coughing. Still, there's something resilient about castle life. You adapt. You learn to breathe through your mouth. You become oddly fond of the rats. You even make friends, a stable boy who can mimic trumpet fanfares with uncanny accuracy, a lady-in-waiting who knows 37 variations of barley stew, and a page who juggles apples, rotten but impressive. Eventually, the siege lifts. The enemy gives up, or is defeated, or simply realizes you're not worth the effort. Trumpets sound. Gates open. You blink at the sunlight like a mole crawling out of a history book. But even as supplies return and fresh air floods the corridors, you carry the siege sickness with you. Not the disease, perhaps, but the memory. The sound of coughs echoing down a stone hallway. The taste of old peas. The rattle of a shared spoon. You survived, which is more than many can say. The coughing's been going on for months now. It's not dramatic anymore. It's just there, a quiet rhythm in your life, like church bells or roosters, or your neighbor's endless humming. Only this sound comes from inside you. Deep, wet, persistent. It rattles in your chest like pebbles in a jar every time you breathe too deeply, which you've learned not to do. They call it consumption, though in your case, it feels like it's the one doing all the consuming. Your appetite's gone. Your weight's vanished. You're not so much sleeping these days as you are slipping into extended naps full of dreams where you float, weightless, untethered from a body that can't seem to stop wasting away. Welcome to tuberculosis, or, as poets prefer to call it, the romantic disease. Romantic, that's the word people whisper, strangely, while watching you slowly fall apart. Because for some reason, the sight of a pale, hollow-cheeked figure coughing blood into a handkerchief became fashionable in certain circles, especially among artists, nobles, and anyone with a flair for the dramatic. There's something about slow, tragic suffering that people can't seem to look away from. You're not feeling particularly romantic, though. Your nights are long and broken. You wake coughing so violently you have to grip the bed frame. There's blood now, small flecks, bright and terrifying at first, now familiar. You hide the stained rags. You don't want to scare anyone. Not that many people come around anymore. You used to work in a weaving shop. You remember the constant clack of looms, the dust hanging in the air like morning mist, and how no one ever really noticed how hard it was to breathe until they couldn't. Now half the shop's gone, dead or too sick to work. Some say the dust caused it. Others say the illness was always there, waiting, whispering, waiting to be inhaled. One apothecary calls it a lung rot. Another says it's the body's way of grieving itself, slowly collapsing under its own weight. You ask for remedies. He gives you licorice root, crushed pearls, and a syrup made from honey and rose petals. It tastes like expensive lies. You drink it anyway. There's no real cure. Not yet. Just advice. Keep warm, rest often, breathe deeply, which is ironic, and try not to get too emotional. Apparently, sadness accelerates the disease. You're told not to laugh too hard either, or sing, or think about death, which is difficult when your neighbor was just buried in the same blanket he used last winter. Historians still argue how much medieval people really understood tuberculosis. Some believed it was hereditary. Others thought it was spread by demons. One treatise describes it as a melancholy humoral imbalance brought forth by excess moonlight and longing, which, honestly, sounds like the tagline of a very bad romance novel. You pass the time reading when you can. The words blur sometimes, but they're comforting. You reread the same psalm 3 times in a row and feel the lines settle into you like sand in a bottle. You even start writing poems, short ones, mostly about rain and silence, and that one time you saw a beetle fall asleep in a thimble. People come and go from your life like ghosts. A friend brings broth one day. She sits by the window and talks about town gossip, the miller's new apprentice, the priest who tripped during Mass. You try to laugh, but it ends in another coughing fit. She winces. You smile through it. That's how it goes. One afternoon, a young girl comes to the door selling herbs. She looks at you carefully, then presses a sprig of thyme into your hand and says nothing. You don't know her. You never see her again. You begin to notice things you never did before. The way the sun moves across your wall. The warmth of tea, even when it tastes like weeds. The birds that nest outside your window and chatter like they're rehearsing a play. Small, inconsequential things. But they matter now. They fill the space between each breath, each cough, each quiet panic that you might not wake the next morning. Your reflection startles you. Gaunt, pale, almost translucent. You look like a sketch someone gave up on halfway through. And yet, there's something fierce in your eyes. A stubborn flicker. You are still here. Eventually, you move less. The stairs are too much. Even sitting for long stretches wears you out. You lie in bed, wrapped in every blanket you own, listening to the world move on without you. But then the strangest thing happens. You don't die, you linger. Days, weeks, seasons shift. You begin to sit up again. The cough is still there, like a rude roommate, but softer. Less rage, more whisper. Your appetite nudges its way back. You even walk to the courtyard, slowly, leaning on a cane carved by your neighbor's grandson. It has a duck's head on top. You name it Bertrand. People begin to smile when they see you, like you're a ghost who decided to haunt politely instead of disappearing. You are not healed, not cured, but you've adapted. Learned to breathe around the pain. Learned that the world continues in small, strange ways, even when your lungs feel like paper and your ribs creak like old pews. And perhaps, in some odd way, that's enough. So, you decide to change careers. Not into weaving, or farming, or poultry-related enterprise. No, that would be far too safe. You decide, in a moment of equal parts desperation and delusion, to become a plague doctor. After all, how hard can it be? Put on a fancy mask, wave around some herbs, offer vaguely threatening diagnoses in Latin, and maybe, people throw money at you for not dying too quickly. Plus, the robe comes with prestige. And, let's be honest, that bird-like mask is weirdly fashionable. You stand in front of the mirror, donning your new attire. The outfit is equal parts theatrical and terrifying. A long waxed overcoat, gloves, a wide-brimmed hat, and, of course, the mask, curved beak, glass eye holes, stuffed with aromatic herbs like mint, rose petals, camphor. It's said to protect against miasma, the bad air blamed for disease. Historians still argue whether this beaked horror ever actually helped anyone. The answer? Likely not much. But it certainly created a vibe. You clack down the cobbled street, medical satchel in hand, radiating the kind of confidence only a complete lack of modern science can produce. People part around you like you're the Red Sea in leather boots. Some whisper prayers. Others gag slightly. One child bursts into tears. All valid reactions. Your first patient is a merchant who claims his entire family's been struck down by the plague. You step into the house and immediately regret it. The smell is medieval. Thick, sour, unmistakably death-adjacent. You try to maintain a professional tone as you examine him from across the room using the official tools of your new trade. A cane for prodding, a mirror for pretending, and a notebook for scribbling things like color, grayish, and eyes, not promising. You prescribe a mixture of garlic, vinegar, and purified frog essence, which is neither purified nor frog, and recommend he stop sleeping next to the fireplace because the humors dislike heat. He thanks you with a crust of stale bread and a haunted look. You leave, not entirely sure if you helped or simply provided entertainment in a very stressful time. Your second patient is already dead. You poke him anyway, just to be thorough. Between visits, you sit in the town square and watch the world teeter toward chaos. People light fires in the streets to drive away the plague. They burn sulfur, throw herbs into the flames, chant prayers. Some smear tar around door frames. Others tie chickens to their feet and walk in circles. Everyone's a doctor now. You start to get a reputation. Not for healing, of course. That would be silly. But for being brave enough to walk into infected houses without screaming. Which, in this line of work, is the closest thing to competence. People begin to seek you out. You listen to symptoms, pretend to know things, and hand out fragrant pouches like they're cures. Inside, you stuff whatever you can find. Dried rosemary, bits of bark, and once, mistakenly, a piece of shoe leather. You try not to panic when symptoms start appearing on your own skin. A rash, perhaps. Or is that just chafing from the mask? A sore throat? Possibly from shouting through 2 layers of linen and existential dread. You chew on time and hope. There are moments of near truth. You begin to notice patterns, who falls ill, how quickly they decline, which households tend to spread the disease more. You even suspect that close contact may have something to do with it. But you can't prove it. You're armed with herbs and hunches. Still, some of your advice isn't terrible. You recommend fresh air. That's reasonable. You suggest people wash their hands. Revolutionary. You advise separating the sick from the healthy. Genius. You feel almost modern for a moment, then immediately ruin it by suggesting someone sleep with an onion in each armpit. You keep a journal, not because anyone will read it, but because writing helps. One entry reads, "Man complained of a headache and died within 12 hours. Wife blamed sin. I suspect moldy cheese. Possible correlation?" Another, "Tried new salve on young boy, mix of goose grease and ground sage. No change. May try less goose." There's a growing sense of doom among your fellow doctors. One admits he hasn't removed his mask in 6 days. Another says he drinks 2 pints of wine before each visit, just in case. You wonder if that's a precaution or an escape plan. Some plague doctors were well paid. Others were conscripted. A few, like you, just sort of showed up and started wearing the outfit until people assumed they were professionals. The profession was more costume than cure, more symbol than science. Still, symbols matter. When people see you walking through the smoke, dressed like a bird from the underworld, they feel, if not safer, at least seen. Your presence means someone is trying. Someone is still watching. And sometimes, that's enough. One evening, you stand at the edge of the mass grave and say a prayer. You don't know all the words, but you say it anyway. Then you drop a handful of dried lavender into the pit, not because it helps, but because it's the last offering you have left. You walk home slowly. The mask feels heavier now. The herbs inside have wilted. The eyeglass is cracked. You take it off for the first time in days. The night air hits your face, cool and quiet. You breathe, carefully, deeply, and wonder whether you'll wear the mask again tomorrow. You hear them before you see them. Chanting, low and rhythmic, feet hitting the ground in steady unison, leather slapping against skin, the sharp, hollow sound of whips slicing air, then flesh. Thwack, thwack, thwack. You step outside to find them flooding the road, dozens of gaunt figures in rough tunics, heads wrapped in cloth, backs exposed and bleeding. They move as one, in a line stretching beyond the bend. Dust rises around their ankles. Some are barefoot. All are covered in dirt, sweat, and the unmistakable glaze of spiritual desperation. You've just encountered the flagellants. They're a brotherhood of sorts, wandering penitents, traveling from town to atone, not for their own sins, but everyone's. They believe the plague is God's punishment, and if you beat your body hard enough, loud enough, publicly enough, maybe he'll call off the punishment. Maybe. They carry banners. They chant Latin phrases that you don't entirely understand. One of them hands you a small scrap of parchment, printed with a crude woodcut of Christ weeping as humanity burns below him. Encouraging. At the front of the group is a man with a crown of thorns and a cloak that's barely holding itself together. His eyes are wild, feverish. He shouts into the sky like he expects an answer. Behind him, another man lashes himself with a knotted cord. Blood streaks his back. He does not flinch. You try to walk away, but they notice you. A young one, barely out of boyhood, approaches and presses a splintered whip into your hand. His voice is hoarse. For the world, he says. You don't know what's expected. Join them? Kneel? Whip yourself until you feel forgiven? Instead, you step back. You nod, unsure what else to do. He bows slightly and rejoins the procession. They pass through town, leaving behind torn dirt, stunned silence, and spots of blood drying in the sun. That evening, you hear people talking about them. Some say the flagellants are holy. Others say they're dangerous, radicals who stir panic and defy church authority. Some towns welcome them. Others ban them outright. Historians still argue whether the flagellant movements helped ease communal trauma or just made it worse. They emerged during the worst plague years and returned during every new flare-up, marching from city to city, whipping themselves into ecstatic fervor. At first, the church tolerated them. Penance was, after all, a good thing. But soon, the movements grew too wild, too chaotic. Eventually, the Pope outlawed them. That didn't stop the bleeding. You lie awake, the whip still beside your bed, wondering what kind of faith requires pain to feel real. The next morning, a neighbor tells you a group of pilgrims is headed your way. Not flagellants, just ordinary folk, walking to a shrine 2 towns over. You watch them arrive by late afternoon. They look exhausted but hopeful. Most carry little more than a satchel, a walking stick, and sore feet. One woman offers you a date cake. You offer her a cup of water. She asks what you're praying for. You hesitate. Forgiveness, you say. She nods like she understands. Pilgrimages are a strange business. People travel for days, weeks even, to kneel in front of relics, a bone, a tooth, a piece of wood said to come from the true cross. They sleep in barns, eat what they can carry, and believe, truly believe, that reaching the shrine will heal them, or at least protect them. You once went on a pilgrimage, years ago, to a remote chapel built into a cliffside. You remember the long walk, the blisters, the sunrise over the hills. You remember the feeling of standing in front of something ancient, something covered in candle wax and whispered wishes. You don't remember what you asked for. The pilgrims rest in your village for the night. You offer your floor to one, a young man with a limp and a voice that sounds like it's made of old parchment. He talks about the people he's met along the road, the old woman who gave him socks, the baker who refused payment, the priest who told him not to bother. You fall asleep listening to his breathing and the soft crackle of the hearth. By morning, he's gone. But the limp remains in your memory, proof that even the wounded still walk towards something. Later that week, you see the flagellants again. Fewer this time. One limps badly. Another wears a blood-soaked rag around his waist. They pass without stopping. No chance. Just the sound of tired feet and the faint jingle of a bell tied to someone's wrist. They seem more ghost than man now. Echoes of their former zeal. A part of you wonders whether the plague is still punishing the world, or whether the world just never learned how to not punish itself. Religion, medicine, pain, they all blur here. In a world where disease is as constant as breath, sometimes the only response left is to do something, even if that something is bleeding in the streets. You pick up the whip they gave you and place it on your shelf, not out of reverence, but as a reminder of how far people will go when answers vanish and silence becomes unbearable. And then you return to your life. One prayer, one step, one day at a time. It starts with a sweat. Not the kind that creeps up on you during a summer afternoon or a brisk walk up a hill, but a violent, sudden, soaking kind. One moment, you're fine. The next, your clothes are drenched, your skin is slick, and your heart is racing like you've been chased by wolves. You're cold and hot at the same time. You feel like you've been boiled from the inside out. You've caught something. But this isn't plague. It isn't typhus. It's not even the flu. This is something altogether different. You've caught sweating sickness, the most mysterious and strangely efficient disease of the medieval world. It strikes without warning. You go to bed healthy, and, if you're unlucky, you're dead by breakfast. It's fast, brutal, and, worst of all, unpredictable. It came out of nowhere in the late 15th century, swept through England like a whisper with a dagger, and then vanished. And to this day, no one knows exactly what it was. At least the plague gives you some warning, some time to think, to panic, to pray. Sweating sickness doesn't bother with that. It just arrives, kicks down the door of your immune system, and leaves you slumped in a chair, steaming like overcooked stew. You first heard about it in whispers. A nobleman collapsed at dinner. A servant boy broke into a sweat and died mid-chores. A clerk fainted over his inkpot and never stood up again. There were no visible sores, no buboes, no wheezing. Just sweat, confusion, and silence. Historians still argue about the cause. A hantavirus? A particularly aggressive strain of influenza? Maybe even ergot poisoning again? No one knows. The symptoms were fast: chills, tremors, chest pain, heart palpitations, and overwhelming, drenching sweats. Death usually came within hours. You remember the first time someone in your town succumbed. A traveling merchant. He looked tired but cheerful in the morning, joked about his aching back, and by nightfall he was laid out in the churchyard, wrapped in linen soaked with his final breath. Now, the rumors return. Another outbreak. 1528, they say. Maybe earlier. You've lost track of years. All you know is, it's here again. You try to prepare. You wash your hands obsessively, an odd behavior for the time, and one your neighbors find deeply suspicious. You air out your rooms. You chew herbs until your teeth feel furry. You sleep with the window cracked open and garlic tied to the doorframe. None of it helps. You wake up at dawn and you're sweating. Not a little. A lot. Your blanket is soaked. Your shirt clings to your skin. Your legs tremble as you try to stand. You've read the accounts. If you don't die in the first 6 hours, you might live. It's a race. You don't know where the finish line is. Your breath is shallow. You sit by the hearth, not sure if it's helping or hurting. You drink cool water. You sip it slowly, like you're bargaining with your own body. The hours crawl. You see shadows moving on the wall. They sway like dancers at the edge of your vision, but there's no music, just the pounding of your heart. At some point, you sleep. Not deeply, more like your body shuts off to reboot. And when you wake up, it's evening, and you're still alive. The sweat is gone. Your skin is cold, but no longer shaking. Your breath is calm. You're ravenous. You stand, slowly, walk to the table, and bite into a hunk of stale bread like it's a royal feast. You lived. You don't know how. You don't know why. No one does. Some say the survivors are marked by grace. Others say you just got lucky. You don't feel lucky. You feel empty. As though something passed through you, scooped out what it wanted, and moved on. You hear of others who weren't as fortunate. A young girl from 2 houses down. A guard. A priest who collapsed mid-sermon. They died the same day it started. And just like that, it stops. The outbreak ends as mysteriously as it began. No fanfare, no conclusion, just silence. Years from now, scholars will try to piece it together. They'll read old journals, track patterns, guess, and still, they won't know. Sweating sickness defies explanation. It appears, it kills, it vanishes, and it leaves you changed. You keep the garlic on the door, just in case. You open the windows wider. You drink your tea slower. You greet your neighbors with more kindness, even the ones who still call your lavender pouch suspicious. You survived another invisible war. And in this world, that's something worth whispering thanks for. And now, the candles are low. The fire's just a pile of soft coals, glowing gently. The room is quiet. The wind outside rustles through the trees, and somewhere far off, a night bird calls, a sound that belongs to the dark, to the hours just before sleep. You've walked a long road tonight. You've felt the fever, heard the bells, held your breath in plague-choked streets, and sat beside beds where hope was a thread stretched too thin. You've worn the mask, faced the fire, chased herbs through shadowy markets, and prayed in languages you don't remember learning. And through it all, you're still here. Let that sink in. You are still here. The world turns slowly. Healing comes slowly. Understanding comes slower still. But night after night, people survived. Laughed, sang lullabies, whispered prayers over bread crusts, and looked up at the same stars we see today. You've seen how fragile life was, and how deeply it was still loved. Now, let your eyes get heavy. Let the echoes of bells and soft coughing fade into the distance. Let the whispers of old remedies drift past you like fog. You're safe now. No plagues tonight. No bad air. Just rest. Just quiet. Just the hush of the past curling into dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.